You will tell me where you have hidden the secret transmissions or you shall die.
You must be in the wrong place.
I know exactly where I am, and I know exactly who you are.
Escape the grid. Join the Geek Legion of Doom.
So how does an obscure 1984 science fiction comedy relate to 2026 British politics? Let me explain. So in 1984, we had the release of Gremloids, or as it's known in other places, HYPERSPACE. And this was written and directed by Todd Durham, who later went on to be involved in the Hotel Transylvania movies. Now in 1987, the VHS was being released of Gremloids, and to promote this, they did a little bit of stunt marketing, and you had in the genuine election that Margaret Thatcher was standing in, you had the movie's primary antagonist, Lord Buckethead, actually stand as a member of Parliament that you could elect to, you know, be in government ultimately. And this is something you can legitimately do here in the UK. So yes, in 1987, you had Lord Buckethead standing next to Margaret Thatcher, and you could choose who you wanted to vote for. Now, there have been plenty of other kind of novelty characters that you can kind of vote for in various kind of elections. But he appeared a few more times, and now we then cut to 2017, and comedian John Harvey resurrected the Lord Buckethead character and stood in an election with the what would be the Prime Minister Theresa May. So John Harvey took over the Lord Buckethead duties, and yes, there's pictures of these two figures standing next to it. It's again a legitimate parliamentary election. However, this caught the attention of the Gremloids writer-director Todd Durham, who requested a cease and desist because Lord Buckethead was actually a copyrighted property. So John Harvey adapted the Lord Buckethead concept to become Count Binface. Very similar looking, but a few differences to make it a copyright-free version of it. There was a situation, I think, in 2019 when you had Count Binface and Lord Buckethead, played by someone else, both in an election, and this Lord Buckethead was actually supported by Todd Durham. But after that, Durham gave his blessings to John Harvey to basically carry on as sort of Count Binface and have that kind of legacy. So now we cut to 2026, and if you're outside the UK, you may not know this, and this is somewhat of a timely thing. Prime Minister hopeful Nigel Farage, who hopes to become Prime Minister in a couple of years and is leader of the Reform Party, which is a right-leaning party here in the UK, he is the elected MP for an area called Clacton. And there's some kind of shenanigans going on. I won't kind of go into it too much here. But ultimately, to try and legitimise himself, he has stepped down from an MP for this seat and then is wanting to be re-elected to kind of prove that he has the people behind him. But all of the other parties in the UK, Labour, the Conservatives, etc., refuse to actually be part of this. The only person that is actually been put forward as a alternate candidate to Nigel Farage is Count Binface, played by John Harvey. And now it's kicked up a bit of a media storm where there is a possibility that that Count Binface could actually beat Nigel Farage in a by-election and could be a legitimate MP. That's the world we live in 2026, folks. So that is the kind of the really the kind of the legacy of the movie Gremloids. Now we are going to talk about the actual movie, don't worry, but I just wanted to kind of give that context about really how this has kind of happened in regards to the kind of the character and the aesthetics and everything like that, because it is quite funny, I must say. So yeah, Gremloids, I actually was going to review this some time ago, but I never got round to it, so I'm kind of glad that I didn't, so I can now incorporate the kind of the Count Binface kind of meme or little surge in popularity that's happening here. But I did actually see Gremloids back in the VHS days, and back then I wasn't quite aware that it was this kind of parody of Star Wars. Now we've seen other parodies of Star Wars, of course, probably most famously Spaceballs. This was one I think is a very obscure, probably flew under the radar of most people, and it's probably more like the movie Zone Troopers, if to kind of compare it to another B movie. So what is the story? Well, we have a kind of Darth Vader-like character in Lord Buckethead, who ends up landing on Earth, but it's actually he lands on Earth by mistake, thinking it's another alien planet, and he is after this princess, clearly based on Princess Leia, who he thinks has got some plans that he's after, and he has this kind of army of like Jawa-looking kind of henchmen, and so he ends up landing in the kind of the American Midwest somewhere, small kind of rural town, and doesn't really understand that he's not in the place where he should be, and it's this kind of over-the-top, you know, Darth Vader's like special cousin, should we call it, now dealing with all of these kind of like Midwestern types who don't really know what's kind of going on and just think it's someone dressed up and things like that. So it's kind of a strange kind of absurdist comedy in some ways, but it's also played quite straight in areas as well. So that's the kind of the movie. Let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. Now I've got to say it is quite funny, particularly when you have Lord Buckethead on screen, because he's played straight enough where it's funny, because you know he's kind of saying all this kind of dialogue. Some of it is like variations of dialogue from the original Star Wars movie. You know, he's looking for the transmissions, you know, he's looking for the plans, and he wants the princess, etc. And you know, he kind of looks kind of sort of similar to, but a goofy version of Darth Vader and everything. And then you have these like clueless Midwesterners who just don't know what he's talking about, and are just like, you know, stereotypical kind of like over-the-top versions of these sort of redneck kind of style sort of characters, and that is the kind of the comedy here. And he ends up thinking the first woman that he sees is the princess, and it's this woman who works in like a car garage place, and he just assumes that that's the princess and chasing her around, and he thinks like, for example, a vacuum cleaner is a droid, and the plans are hidden in there and things like this, and it's kind of, some people are kind of going on with it and stuff like that. So there's actually some quite funny moments in it, not all through, as we'll talk about in the negatives, but there are some legitimately funny bits in it, particularly if you are kind of familiar with Star Wars. And it's not as over the top as a movie like Spaceballs, and the fact that it's sort of played semi-straight in some areas, it kind of makes it almost funnier to a degree, because a lot of the characters play it like straight. There's other references as well. We have a character played by Elliott, who's probably the biggest name here, who's kind of like playing like a Quint character, a bit like from Jaws, well, Quint kind of mixed with Hooper really, who is like this believer of aliens and things like this. But there are some other funny moments, for example, even the fact there are legitimately aliens, you know, visiting and interacting with our townsfolk. They still kind of exaggerate when the police are taking sort of, you know, witness statements from these kind of characters. They're kind of massively sort of exaggerating the kind of the situation. And again, this is kind of harking back to all of the sort of alien abduction experiences that we kind of heard a lot about back in this kind of time. So there are some kind of quite funny moments here. Our main protagonists are just very much like salt of the earth people, nothing kind of special, which again kind of makes it for this kind of everyman sort of feel, which again is quite fun. And there are a couple of kind of like action sequences. They're kind of played with tongue in cheek, but you know, you have laser guns. There's a kind of sequences towards the end where the army are getting involved and they're sort of fighting against this, you know, this kind of spaceship and everything like that. So there's a kind of mix between sort of goofy humour, but scenes where it is taken kind of semi-seriously. And I remember watching this kind of when it came out on VHS and not understanding it was quite a spoof, if that makes sense. I kind of watched it, and back then I was obviously quite young, and you know, I could tell it wasn't necessarily a serious movie like, you know, like other science fiction films, but didn't quite get the kind of like the parody aspect like it was so much. So I do think it has a, you know, an amusing mix of its kind of tonal areas. It's a very, very low budget movie. And it's best when our aliens are actually on screen. There are a few kind of like, albeit very low budget kind of VFX sequences. We see the kind of the spaceship and everything like that. I mean, they've made like a practical model for the spaceship that's kind of like landed in this kind of like field somewhere, and there's quite a lot of the kind of the action that takes place around that. And we do see a few like military vehicles, so there's a little bit of sort of you know, production in certain elements of it. But what doesn't work, I mean, this is a low budget movie. It's a pretty obscure film, I have to say. And again, I'll compare it to the likes of Zone Troopers. If you don't like the low budget aesthetic, this isn't going to change your mind. And there are some kind of like, even though you can kind of enjoy the low budget kind of VFX, even by 84 standards, there's some shoddy ones done. For example, there's a sequence in a supermarket where you have these kind of flying shopping carts and stuff, and you know, it's cheaply handled, shall we say. I think the comedy when we have our Lord Buckethead character on the screen are the best bits. When we have our human characters and Lord Buckethead and the other aliens aren't there, it's not as funny. There are still some funny moments, but the humour is sort of hit and miss. So it's not like a laugh right through the movie. There are some funny moments. I mean, it's almost funnier now you watch it, and knowing what's happened with the legacy of this movie and what's kind of happened in, you know, to this kind of style of character in 2026. And it seems like not many people realise where this has come from, because I've seen a lot of the news and barely anyone mentions this movie. So, you know, it's funny if you're in the know, that's certainly true. But it's not like a laugh. I do think some of the jokes are kind of like run out of steam, and the kind of the human characters, including our protagonist, even though I quite like that they've got this everyman feel, aren't particularly interesting characters, it must be said. So yeah, they come across as a little bit bland, to be honest with you, and don't have maybe you could have led into a little bit more absurdity. I also think there's a little bit of a missed opportunity that didn't lean more into directly sort of referencing kind of Star Wars, or at least not, if not by name. There's one sequence where we see like some C-3PO like breakfast cereal, but I'm surprised characters weren't sort of referencing that. Aren't you in that science fiction movie? Aren't you from that film, and things like that? Again, I don't know why that wasn't necessarily part of this film, but look, it's an enjoyable kind of like obscure, somewhat absurdist movie that has its moments. Ultimately, though, I think it sort of wears out its welcome after a little while, and I don't think maybe you want to probably watch a few clips of it necessarily, but I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Were you aware of the kind of the Count Binface rise in popularity? 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts? If you have seen it, leave me comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
For the Legion! For the Geek Legion!